411 Live.
Where you can learn about issues that affect us every day. State of world, 411 Live.
Real people, real talk.
Made to help people in our community in every way. For your girl, 411 Live.
It happens too often in Milwaukee. Lead poisoning. Maps from 2019 indicated that in one district in the city, 1 in 6 children under the age of 6 had elevated blood lead levels. Folks, this is serious. And what it can do to children, the impact that it can have, is frightening. Hello, I'm Beverly Taylor, and this is the 411 Live. Real people, real talk. I am joined by 3 ladies, and I'm very, very happy about this. Holly Nannis, Public Health Nurse Supervisor for the Childhood Lead Poisoning Prevention Program for the Milwaukee Health Department. That's a long title, but it's good to have you. Deanna Branch and Shyquetta McElroy, both parent advocates with the Coalition of Lead Emergency, COLE for short, and both are mothers of children who have experienced lead poisoning. Welcome to you. I'm going to let you take some water because I can hear that in your throat. Welcome to all of you. Holly, I want to start with you, though. Where are we in terms of, where are we in terms of numbers of children who have been poisoned by lead?
Well, that's going to be a challenging number in that in the years, in Milwaukee specifically, going back to data from 2018, 2019, we had approximately 25,000 children.
Wow.
That were screened, that were individual children that were screened and had lead poisoning. Due to the pandemic, those numbers, the screening numbers have gone way down. Mm-hmm. Some of that has to do with an instrument that was used by a lot of providers to do what we call capillary screenings, which is the first round of screening for children.
That instrument was recalled, wasn't it?
Right, it was recalled. So that really took a major instrument out of circulation for almost a year. And then also there's because of the pandemic, a lot of these children were just not going into their providers. And a lot of the healthcare providers were redeployed because of the pandemic. Yeah. So we are now in a phase of trying to catch up, in a catch-up phase to get children screened. So right now, just based on some data that came out from the state, that across Wisconsin, we are at the lowest screening rate for more than 10 years.
Oh, my goodness.
So we were getting, screenings were going up, mm-hmm. and then due to the pandemic and the recall of that machine, we're at all-time low right now.
Yeah.
The lowest we've been in 10 years.
Yeah. So in terms of numbers, there's no way to really calculate that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, Deanna, I know your son was hospitalized at 2. And he had elevated lead levels. How did this come about? I mean, where did you find out he had the elevated levels to get him into the hospital? Were there symptoms or what happened?
He was hospitalized twice. The first time was when he was 2. It wasn't until a routine lead check at the WIC office where I was alerted that, he had a high lead level, and the WIC office just told me to take him in to his pediatrician. I really didn't know it would be as severe to the point where when he did get tested, he was admitted into the hospital. 2 days after the test results came back, he was being admitted into the hospital. I had so many questions that I felt like weren't really being answered. It wasn't really until just becoming a member of COLE that I learned the severity of really all of my child had to face, but there definitely were signs that were being passed off as just like, oh, he's just going through a terrible 2 phase. It's what they call it, but it was definitely signs that I felt as a parent I really knew something was off. So it was just hard to. All of my worries were. It was just came to a full head when he was diagnosed with lead poisoning, and after he was diagnosed with that, a lot of other things came about with his behavior as far as ADHD and ODD, and it just really is a lifelong process for any child who is lead poisoned. No matter severity, there's no safe level of lead in the blood for a child.
Yeah, yeah. And so when you were at the pediatrician, I think were you telling me that you told the doctor something seems a little
Yeah,
off?
this is before the WIC office appointment, and I was just before I moved into the house that he was lead poisoning in, but he was having it was a I don't think it was the lead level in the first house or my eldest son we were living in. It wasn't as bad, but the pediatrician office in the neighborhood I took him to, she didn't really address my concerns when I was having concerns about his behavior. She just passed it off as terrible two-faced. That every child is different because I didn't experience those symptoms with my oldest son. It wasn't until I moved into a new house with my sons and a new pediatrician, and after the WIC office visit, that's when she really was more hands-on and addressed my concerns, got him tested right away, and walked me through the process of him being admitted into the hospital for lead poisoning. And I just feel like she really was a big help. She's a part of Cole now. She's an awesome pediatrician that he still visits till this day. And she's going to be my new daughter's pediatrician as well. She's just awesome. It's just really great to. Through all of this craziness, I created a lifelong friend with my pediatrician. It's been great knowing her.
Yeah, and I should mention that you are an expected mother, so congratulations to you for that. Tell me the effects that you were mentioning.
It really is different for every child. My oldest son, he wasn't as impacted. He wasn't hospitalized for his lead poisoning, but he does have problems in school that affects his learning process. It's hard for him to concentrate and focus. He has dyslexia, so he has barriers that it makes it hard for him to, get up and he writes things and reads things in a way that he understands that other people might not understand. So it's really a learning process for him to have the courage and confidence to really voice his concerns without feeling like he's being judged or ridiculed. Aiden he just has trouble just focusing and concentrating and sitting still. But when he does manage to sit still, he actually does very well with testing. Just doing homework and just listening and learning new information is really hard for him. So for every child, it really is different. And it's just like really two different sides of a coin trying to get them to concentrate in school. And it's just so interesting to hear so many other stories of other children and parents and what they have to go through. And that's really the thing that amazes me most about lead is just that it really affects every child differently. And there's different barriers that each child has to face. And they're all superheroes in their own way for overcoming daily obstacles.
Right.
Because it really is a lifelong phase. And that's what most people don't get, that is really a lifelong thing.
So, Shai, you have a child. Is just one that was affected by the lead?
Yes.
Okay. So what was that story? Because I think you didn't really know it until he was 5.
Yes. So I knew that he had elevated lead levels between 3.5 to 5.5 micrograms per deciliter, but I didn't really know
what those
it
numbers
was a
went?
problem
Yeah.
or what those numbers meant until he was repeating K5.
He had to repeat K5.
Yes.
Okay. So what happened then?
Then I was just like Deanna at the WIC office, and that's where I found out that he had those elevated levels up to 9.9 at that point.
Oh, wow.
In the midst of finding that out, I also was having a IEP done with him because he was failing and way tremendously behind in K5. Now we're talking kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
So I've never heard of a child not passing K5. And that's just the stage of how far behind my son was. And so we pulled his medical records, and it was an ongoing thing because he was being tested at his doctor, and the WIC office, but no one was doing anything about the elevated lead levels. No one was giving me information about what's lead, what I need to look out for, how this is going to affect my son. So after pulling his medical records and doing his IEP and going through everything, that's when I really found out, like, oh, this is going to change our lives.
Right, right. So how has it affected him?
In so many ways, like Deanna said, every child is affected differently. And my son, he has cognitive and educational delays. He has really bad anxiety attacks and really struggling to really make his mark in the education piece, but also outside of that, it's a fear for me as well because I seriously just pulling up to a store. My son's 16 now. And so any 16-year-old should be able to walk into a store and make a minor purchase and walk out of the store. I fear that my son is going to shut down or have some kind of panic attack inside of a store, even going to buy a bag of chips.
Oh, wow.
So it's definitely a fact.
Right. And Holly, the thing from these two ladies is it affects children differently. And, lead poisoning, there are different levels of it,
Right.
that kind of thing. So what happens when they were talking about testing? And so it's very, very important that when a child gets tested and they get the result and the levels are elevated, that something is done, not just, oh yeah, you're elevated levels, right?
Right.
So I'm just wondering, everybody that's involved in that, do they get it? Do they understand how important this is to follow up?
Well, I think over the years, I'm not sure if things were as connected as they should have been. I can speak for my time back at the health department, which has been a little over 3 years now. But when I came back and we were looking at the program and what needed to be done, there's a couple of things as far as all children can be exposed to lead hazards at any age, but all children can be exposed to lead hazards. The blood lead level in a child is known through usually a capillary screen. And then based on that level, then we would do a venous draw. And that's what we call confirmatory. And that data all goes into a state database that notifies all the local health departments around any child in their jurisdiction that has an elevated blood lead level or has been exposed. So in the city of Milwaukee, we would, what would require a follow-up with a public health nurse would be levels of 15 micrograms per deciliter venous, 90 days apart, or 20 and above to trigger a nurse being assigned to that child and an inspector being assigned to the property that would go in and investigate the house as to where the lead hazards are. So that is put out by state statute. CDC makes recommendations, and then each state will determine what level there will be a reaction to. So at the time where Deanna and Shai's, the time that their child at the lower levels, the health department at that time did not have a response for the lower levels. We've been working to lower our intervention levels. So we did voluntarily go down to just 115 because why wait 90 days?
Yeah.
Okay. So we went down to 115 that will initiate a nurse case manager being assigned and the property to be investigated. Which would be a primary address or any place else that child spends time. So we may have one child, but we may need to investigate 3 properties because they visit grandma or the babysitter. So on average, every child generates about 2 to 3 addresses. But we want to make sure that we're covering all of where the child spends time. We are currently piloting and with developing our community partners that we can lower that threshold down to 10. So at a 10, we would have the nurse case manager go out and I can talk through what the nurses do when they work with families and with the providers. But we're piloting right now going down to 10 that would get a nurse case manager assigned and then also work with our community partners in order to have those properties investigated for lead hazards. For the lower levels, the 3.5, which is the new reference level from CDC, to 9.9, we are working through with our partners and with Cole around really getting the messaging out around one, what needs to happen, what things can be done on a daily basis within a home also that can that you can control some of the lead hazards that can be at home.
Great. I'm going to stop you there. We're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back and talk a little bit more on what we're talking about now, but also kind of the parental things that can be done. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
You're not going to get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff, like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the-right-seat.
When I was growing up, my mom was extremely tidy. We were trained to put things back where we got them from. One day, when I walked into my mom's house, I felt like I walked to someone else's house. There was stuff everywhere. And just growing up the way I grew up, and to see this transition was very alarming.
When Sean talked to me, it was a wake-up call, and that's when I went to the doctor.
Welcome back to the 411 Live. We are talking to two mothers who have children who have experienced lead poisoning, and we have a nurse supervisor from the health department. And we were kind of going through some of the steps that you guys take. You've got this child, the child is tested, the screening, you know, you've got case management that they go through. So a nurse has this case. Where does she go from there? Does she do additional screening, or, you know, is she helping the family cope with this, or what's happening?
Okay, so once every child that has a blood level screening done, whether it's capillary or venous, we get notified through a database from the state. So when we get those levels, we will know exactly who the child is, their date of birth, who drew their blood level, what the level was. And based on what level it's at, a nurse will be assigned as a case manager and immediately reach out to that family to connect with the family or the guardian, but then also to connect with the primary care provider. So if a child comes through with a very elevated, let's say for 40 or 45 and above, where they may have to be hospitalized, that is done immediately. So that we work directly with the primary care provider, but also now we've developed a lead care management team in children's that the handoff from finding out the elevated lead, getting them into the hospital, and getting them care managed. That nurse case manager works directly with the staff in the hospital, but also work with families to let them know what's happening. We have a certain routine of follow-up times, so we may send letters out, or we may do a phone call to say this is what the level is and this is what you need to do next. We're working a lot with providers to make sure that they build that into their electronic health records, and to start to consider lead poisoning as a chronic condition, not just for toddlers, because lead is toxic once it is in the body. So that's the significance. So when the nurses go into the home, they do education on what they can, how to be able to wet mop the floors, where the lead hazards are usually found. Usually it's doorways and windows where there's chipping paint, but also the nurses go in and they do what's called a developmental screen. So they will go in, and there's one for physical, and then one's for social emotional. So lead is toxic, and it can affect the brain, it can affect the kidneys, the heart, and once that there is damage, it is really difficult to undo that damage, because it is a lifelong experience. So when the nurses have the developmental screen done, and there are findings, we will refer them into community organizations and make sure they get there. So, for example, there's a Penfield, which will be working with aggression and anger behaviors. There's also Birth to 3 that will work with developmental and speech. There's also Head Starts, kids into Head Starts that will help bridge some of these educational gaps. So we really have this continuity and making sure that if we refer them in, that they actually do get in. So we work very closely with the family as they go through this unfortunate journey of their child being lead poisoned.
Right.
And then we follow them until the property's inspected, the lead hazards are removed, and then we wait and work with the families and have continued screenings to make sure those blood levels come down before we would close that case. So we work for families for sometimes several years.
Okay. Okay. Shai, I know, and you too, Deanna, I know that you guys are advocates for your children. I mean, you are on top of it. And I think you went back to school, Shai,
Yes.
so that you could better teach your child.
Yes.
That's huge.
Every child has their own learning pattern or their own way of learning. And through going to school, I realized that I had to meet my son where he was at and guide him in that way. So,
Yeah, that is great. And I'm sure that in school, because of those attention deficits, or it's hard to pay attention, that affects your child, right?
oh, definitely. Definitely. That's why my course on sensories was so important. And I was just like honed in, and they had my full attention because that's what he needed to get him through a lot of stuff, like his attention span and focus wise. Those sensory objects, like even a fidget spinner, that can help a child from having a whole breakdown.
Wow. Are you guys kind of surprised, Deanna and Shai? Are you surprised by, your whole experience? Now you're in the community. You're advocates. You're parental advocates. You're teaching other people how to deal with this. Are you surprised by your new roles now?
I would say no. If anything, I'm more so, I think more so like ready to hit the front lines with it, because God forbid that another child has to go through what my son went through, or another family don't know, or another family has all the signs right there in front of their face. They just haven't had anyone talk to them.
Right.
So I am more than willing to talk to any family, be on the front lines, knock on doors, canvas blocks, all that good stuff.
Right. The other thing that's, makes this so, I don't know, so important to get the word out. There is a concentration in Milwaukee where lead is real prominent, and that's the north side of Milwaukee. So if somebody goes and rents a property there, say they have limited funds, just so much, so they're looking for a rental property that, satisfies that. They get in there, and then they discover there's lead. So they move a couple of blocks down the street because they still have just so much money, and they move in that place, and it has lead too. So that's another problem. We talk about redlining, historical segregation, and all these things, and it bothers me.
I agree with Shai. I'm not surprised what I do now. It kind of seems like fate, because sharing my story, just the way I felt advocating for my son, it was kind of embarrassing and a shame for me to talk about it, because I felt like it was really something that, I caused and I made this happen. But sharing my story and opening up to my community and the positive response and so many similar stories, countless stories from other parents, and it made me just think like, wow, this is not just a me problem, this is a community problem, and why isn't anything being done? So I just feel like it was destined to be, because I just wish that I had known a supportive group like Cole and known someone like me to advocate with me. And I just felt so alone going through my journey with Aiden. And I don't want the parents and children to feel like how me and Aiden felt. So it feels really good to be in a position where I feel like I'm not alone and I have support and other parents have help.
Right. That's good. And I should mention that, you are what almost friends with the Vice President, Kamala Harris, who you've talked to about the whole thing of lead poisoning, and you were a guest for the State of the Union address just recently. So that is good. So you have a national platform, and that of course helps as well. Holly, something you had mentioned earlier, that it is so important to collaborate with the community. And you mentioned that this good partnership with Cole is making a difference too, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think for a lot of communities whose voices have not been listened to before, sort of feel hopeless. And if we're going to make some significant differences in neighborhoods that unfortunately have historically had lead-poisoned children disproportionately, that is definitely social injustice, and we need to change that.
Right.
But by having families, one, feel supported by other families that have gone through this experience, but also how can we, on a day-to-day basis, sometimes you might not know if you have chipping paint, if it's leaded paint or not. So there are things that can be done on a daily basis. Just, the best things is making sure if there's cracks in the walls, you can put duct tape over it, because or the windows, high friction areas. So in the summertime, unfortunately, we have more children that get exposed to lead during the summertime because they're outside playing in the dirt, where we've had decades of leaded gas build up in the soil, but also high friction. So windows, doors, porches, those are some of the key areas where it's high friction. You can repaint it, but it's, opening, closing those windows then takes, rubs down the paint, then it gets down to the lead-based dust. So when the primary thing with abatement is we replace all the windows, we replace the doors. The lead risk assessors go in and they identify the surfaces that are leaded, and then there's a scope of work, and then that process moves forward. And the property owners must do this. Okay, this is not an option for them.
Yeah, they should want to. I mean, when you think about it, children are our future.
Right.
They're precious commodities. So this really has to be done. You gave some great tips there, and I just wonder, what else can parents do? I know you had talked about a safety kit, and you both had talked about foods that absorb lead, and I'd never heard that before.
Yes, absolutely.
What are
Nutrition
they?
is one of the biggest things that's attached to this, because you have a lot of families who don't have the means to, well, I'm going to say it like this. You have children who the only meal that they get is at school. And those are the children that you're going to find the highest lead levels in.
Oh, wow.
So nutrition is everything connected to this. When you're talking about getting a lead safe kit, nutrition is part of that. So to have a child that is eating those green leafy vegetables and drinking their calcium and getting that proper amount of iron in, that is critical to combating lead in children.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of children, like the sad truth is, don't get those meals.
Right.
So, the lead safe kit, though it does give you duct tape to put on the windowsill and, make sure you got the wipes to wipe off surfaces and stuff. If your child is not eating properly, they're still going to get exposed to lead.
So do you think that is the biggest tip that you could give parents to make sure that nutrition?
The biggest tip that I can give to parents is it's not impossible. It's not impossible. That's why we work so hard to have our food drives, to make sure that food is getting out to the communities. Every 3 months, we have those food drives, and making sure that families are getting their full benefits. SNAP program with the WIC, and knowing where to go get those foods from. There's not enough publicity on even a commercial to say, hey, your child is trying to combat lead, need nutrition. This is what they can eat. This is where you can go. So along with that, an important piece is giving families recipes.
Speaking of recipes, how's that cookbook coming, Deanna?
It's really exhausting and fun. Working with my children on creating a children's cookbook for children, for healthy recipes to absorb the lead that kids actually want to eat. It's been fun and exhausting working with my kids. It's just they're like night and day. So it's been fun and exhausting, but just I like to add on like just teaching daily habits, keeping parents informed, teaching your kids habits of just taking off their shoes when they enter the house so they don't bring in the lead soil, making sure they wash their hands, and just keep them aware when you create daily routines and rituals with kids, they just become more accustomed to being lead safe without even knowing it. And I also just want to mention Aiden, the Lead-Free Superhero book, illustrated completely by my son Aiden. It tells a little bit about his story, and there's a little something in the back of the book for parents to help with what to do and what steps to take when their child is exposed to lead. So it's a little bit of an information packet for children and parents to help them become more proactive in the fight against lead, and just to keep kids informed about what lead is and how to defeat the lead monsters in the water, paint, and soil.
That's very good. Can people contact Cole to get that?
It's available on Amazon and other retail outlets. But
And what is it called?
Aiden, the Lead-Free Superhero.
Aiden, the Lead-Free Superhero.
I definitely will recommend the Cole website for parents to keep them informed, up to date, if they want to become more involved in Cole.
And that website is?
coalitiononleademergency.org, and all tips and ways to get a lead safe kit and so on and so forth is on there as well.
On there. Okay. Well, ladies, we've run out of time. It went fast. You gave so much information. Thank you, ladies, for sharing your stories and your children with us today. And thank you, Holly, for all the great information that you've given us from the health department. So a lot needs to be done, but this is not a problem that can't be solved. You know, if everybody's working together. Yeah, we got to do it. Can't stop because our children are. Their health is at stake. So thank you all. My guest, Holly Nannis, public health nurse supervisor for the Childhood Lead Poisoning Prevention Program for the Milwaukee Health Department. Deanna Branch and Shyquetta McElroy, both parent advocates for Coalition of Lead Emergency, or COLE as we call it. And both are mothers of children who have experienced lead poisoning. And again, thank you for sharing their stories.
No problem.
And thank you for joining us for another edition of the 411 Live. We are a nonprofit organization, so if you're so inclined to help us out, go to our website, the411live.org. Until next time, I'm Beverly Taylor. This is the 411 Live. Real people, real talk. If you would like to check out past episodes, there are many ways. Go to your favorite platform. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Like and watch us on Facebook. Watch and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you have suggestions for future episodes, go to our website, the411live.org.